Hello everyone and welcome to this session of Dataiku Product Days. Today in this session we are going to talk about operational excellence. So how you can transform those shiny data, machine learning and LLM projects into working productions projects. My name is François Sergault. I am a product manager at Dataiku, focusing on the ops topics. And I am going to be joined today by Chris Elmus, which is a senior sales engineer at Dataiku. And if we want to talk about the agenda, so I'm going to start by introducing the principle, how MLOps is driving the way we do the product and how we try to enable our customers to use MLOps in their organizations. Then the bulk of the presentation is about Chris showing this in action in the product, because I guess that's the whole point of that. And I'm going to be finishing by a bit of roadmap items and the stuff we are actually working on. So let's start with the principles. MLOps is not a new thing at Dataiku. I mean, it's a topic that we are dealing with for probably more than 10 years now, even before I joined Dataiku. And even today, we still hear and we still think that there are the same kind of issues at customers when dealing with machine learning projects. It's issues that stem from the fact that maybe originally machine learning was an experimentation from a small, fully empowered data science team that did everything, that actually worked well and get used, which is very, very cool, very nice. But in the end, it's when things start to get used, then the hard part is actually starting. Because then, even in the design, you have multiple people that may have different profiles, different expectations. But when you deploy, when you start to have something that should run in production, whatever that means, you have more people that need to be in a loop, that they have their own requirements, questions, topics that may be well or not understood by the historical people doing the job. And in the end, this can create tensions, frustrations, and even inefficiency globally. And if you think about that for like a single or small project or a small number of projects, I mean, if in the future you plan to scale, it's gonna be worse, let's be honest. And all those questions, all those fears, they're just gonna, expand and they're gonna become out of control in the end. What do we think? What do we do about that? I mean, of course, and there is no mystery in that. The answer, or kind of part the answer, is MLOps. MLOps is not a Dataiku thing. It's definitely something that was not invented by Dataiku, but it's just a way to actually move those machine learning projects, adapting the DevOps principles into machine learning world. And that's what Dataiku embraced quite a long time ago, and still is. We are working on that. It's a never-ending topic of features and of developing the product. However, the way we think of the MLOps, and we want to encourage our customers to do MLOps with Dataiku, is maybe, I would say unique. I could even say that. And that's something I just want to highlight first into what are the three aspects that we look at in a product when we try to expand the MLOps capabilities and that we think are key. The first one is multi-persona. Well, it's not something MLOps specific. It's Dataiku stuff. If you know about all the features in Dataiku, we always think about having people with coding skills, non-coding skills, business users, data scientists, ML engineers, IT being able to use the tool because we think it's important. And in fact, if you get back to the history of MLOps and even DevOps, it's really about breaking silos and making people working together. That's the essence almost of the concept. So multi-persona is a key aspect. And every feature we develop, and we're going to talk about some features, and Chris is going to show some, they're always thought about being coder, non-coder, a mix of that, or going from a simple non-coding stuff out of the box to a more complex, customized option. The second point is this notion of multi-axis. It's just the fact that your project, it's not just a model. It's much more than that. There's data to fetch, to prepare. There may be web applications, dashboards, automations, and all of things that those come together to being a project. So you cannot look at designing, deploying, and monitoring a project just from a model angle. You need more than that. And the third point is to deal with the reality of what we see on the field, is that there are many data science and machine learning tools. A lot of customers have multiple of them. Maybe one day it's going to be unified, but at least we need to provide a way, we need to think to support that. For data, it's actually very native in Dataiku. We can connect to a lot of data storage systems. But even for machine learning, we need to be adapted to that. We need to allow our customer to be agile, to incorporate things coming and working in multiple platforms. So again, there was the high-level principles of the way when we think about MLOps practices and the way we want to help our customers implement MLOps practices, what we think of. Being multi-personas, being multiple axis, and being multi-platforms. Now, this stays generic principles. And this, in fact, gets transformed into feature in the product because that makes sense. I mean, as a product manager, that's my job. And to highlight a bit of those key features, here for multi-persona, if you ever used or seen even a demo of Dataiku, the first one is the flow. But I'm not going to talk that much about it because when you think about MLOps and production, it's the deployer that is the key. It's the tool that allows anyone to deploy an entire project into production. It can be very simple as a full self-service. It can be extended to being very customized or in a highly regulated environments. And it works end-to-end with govern. If you want to actually do that and expand that to more complex or I would say regulated environments. And it's the same thing. It's simple, but can be extended, can be customized. And same thing from the monitoring in the end, if you think about operationalization. Monitoring comes out of the box with model evaluation stores, but can be customized if you have very specific needs and more information. The multi-axis, it's something that we actually expanded in the past. Model, I would say, design and deployment and monitoring is an old thing at Dataiku. But lately, we've added those other axes more into Dataiku. Like adding the data axis, we added the data catalog, data quality rules. We are working on data lineage. So there's all those data aspects to it. We have the governance that comes into play. We have all this notion of infrastructures, the activity, the latencies, and the response times. This is this multi-axis. And of course, this materializes in a unified monitoring, because that's kind of the central cockpit that we wanted to develop around this multi-axis. But it's actually getting fused in a lot of places nowadays. It's something we're still working on, but that's really something that we want to highlight. That a project is not just a model. And so the monitoring should not just be model monitoring, it should be much more than that. And the multi-platform was actually a very high focus on the XOps team in Dataiku in the last year, with deploy anywhere, with external models, which is in a way to, again, codeless, fetch the models where they are. If you have other teams using other platforms, deploy where you need to deploy for, again, any reason. And again, adapting, breaking technological silos. So you really have people working together. That's really the key. So again, that's those features like the deployers, like unified monitoring and external models. They are really examples of how we take MLOps principles. We try to provide our customers with the tool to actually implement them in a proper and very agile way in their own context. This is actually somehow simple. And 2 years ago, everyone knows that a vendor that I'm not going to name released a tool that suddenly made AI top of the headlines. Everyone wanted to use GenAI, large language model. Did it break anything? Did it broke anything? Yes. It did. I mean, definitely. You don't manage LLM and GenAI the same way you manage the rest. So the MLOps features were actually needed to reworking. And that's what we did over the last years. And I'm going to make a very small sidestep. Start of that is talking about the LLM mesh. So I'm not going to talk about the LLM mesh itself. There are other sessions for that. If you're interested, I encourage you to attend to these sessions. But saying that the LLM mesh, it's kind of the toolbox in Dataiku to leverage large language models. And actually, it's a very powerful toolbox to adapt your existing platform and practices for using LLM, in fact. Because in fact, with LLM, you can build your GenAI application alongside or within your existing project. You can reuse familiar ops features, and that's highly important because then first you gain speed. You don't have to relearn an entire tool. You don't have to take risk by forgetting the sign-off, forgetting how you deploy or how you evaluate the stuff. The logic is still there. So you're reusing and you're gaining speed and confidence. And then you focus on where LLM is actually different from standard models, which is true. There are features. If you think about cost, if you think about PII, if you think about even the platform itself, it's completely different. So again, yes, LLM kind of broke the loop and the logic of existing projects. But the LLM mesh allowed us to keep the framework and most of the feature and make them work together and being able to still continue to deploy with new pieces that you can actually use in your projects. So that's LLM Ops, and that's actually something we are still working on, and it's a work in progress. But again, we are keeping the same logic, the same principles you've seen above, but adding LLMs with their specificities. Still, again, just to very briefly summarize something that is always important at Dataiku, our goal is still to provide this unified environment, end-to-end, all stages of the life cycle. So you are able, whether you're a small data science team doing machine learning with all powers, up to a very regulated, highly governed organization, you can use Dataiku from beginning to end, and you can integrate it in your environment kind of easily, and being agile, deploying your project, realizing the value of AI, and in the future scale to have maybe hundreds or thousands of projects or model applications. That's the end of the principles, I would say, because as I say, I think everyone can do slides and talk about things, but I think one important point is actually see that how it works in Dataiku, and I'm sure you're all there to actually see how it looks like. And I'm going to hand it over to Chris, which is going to then show that to.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks, Francois. And really, my goal is to help make everything that Francois just talked about real by taking you through more of a day in the life of different stakeholders managing an analytic process in Dataiku. Think manufacturing company making things for data centers. So as you expect, factory line downtime and our predictive maintenance models, very important. And I think what I want to highlight is that in the past, all of our ops processes for these sorts of use cases were very disjointed across personas and tech, hard to replicate best practices, and also, to call back to something Francois mentioned, how we were thinking about handling GenAI was totally separate. But now with Dataiku, we have one pane of glass for end-to-end, from data to models to GenAI. So if we start as a data scientist coming into work, you can see here, I've got an alert that's right where I'm used to getting messages, right here in Slack. And this is showing how first Dataiku ran through an automated check on my model, saw that it was drifting, gave me that red alert that we crossed over a threshold. It then ran some data quality checks on my retrain pipeline, which passed. So we then kicked off an automatic model retrain. So all of that's happening in the background in an automated way. And so really now what I'm worried about is how to diagnose, solve, and validate. So I can actually click into one of these alerts, and I'll be brought right to that model's Dataiku project. Right? And the project has everything I need to do that diagnosing and solving, from dashboards to my logic to job automations and histories. And what I'll start with is by reviewing this model monitoring dashboard, where I'm able to see that both data drift and prediction drift crossed over a threshold. That's what kicked off that initial Slack alert to me and started kicking off that data quality checking and retraining pipeline. But I want to take a little bit of a deeper look. So I'll head into Dataiku's model evaluation store, which automatically captures those metrics we saw on the dashboard in a standardized, reusable way. Now, I just want to note, you're seeing these metrics over time. These are metrics focused on that data and prediction drift to make sure I get proper alerting, even when there's a long lag time for ground truth info on machine failures. Now, these are the metrics, but the alerts you saw were actually powered by these metrics and checks that let me set thresholds however I need to. So this is what kicked off all those actions. But what I really want is to understand a little bit more about what actually drifted, not just the thresholds. So I'll head into that latest run from my model evaluation store, where Dataiku is letting me compare my train time data up against my new current data related to my machines. I can filter by my most drifted features here, and I can see some really helpful information. Now, keep in mind, blue is my current data, so I can see how the distributions of my fields have shifted, right? With some spikes at higher values for rotational speed, for higher torque, tool wear, lower air temperature. And if I wanted to, a key kind of piece of the Dataiku puzzle here is that I could always tag in a subject matter expert, see if what we're seeing in this drifting area makes sense. I can also, if I want a little bit of a different view of drift, I can also look at prediction drift and see that originally I was predicting around 1% of machine failures. And with the latest data with how much it's drifting, I'm actually up to predicting almost 20% of failures. So definitely this model has been drifting. This makes sense to me. I really want to now investigate the other actions that were taken as a result of that drift threshold being breached. And with Dataiku, seeing those automated actions all again in one place in the same project. Let's look at that automation. And here I get a visual representation of what happened. Right? I can see my model evaluation store being built, some rules or checks getting errors, which then kicked off data quality checks and retraining my model. And I think what I want to note here is you're seeing these automations. In this case, my drift checks were automated, my data quality checks were automated, and so was my retrain. But in this case, we're keeping me, this human, in the loop for this process because of its critical business nature. We absolutely could automate the entire process all the way through into production deployment if it makes sense for the use case. The other thing I'll note here is that these scenario logs here, they're really just pointers directly to the Dataiku project itself, where the map of my process is laid out, which makes that diagnosis really easy, including the health of my data pipeline. So if we come back to that map of the process, we can see that retrained data set, see the retrained pipeline leading up to that model. And if I want to understand that health of my data, it's just a couple clicks to come look at my data quality metrics. Now here I have one on my machine failure field, which is a very critical field, making sure there aren't any empty values, but I can create any data quality checks I like. I can templatize them and reuse them across my data sets and projects. I can even see overall data quality health for my entire project for any checks I've made across the pipeline. Okay, so understanding model drift makes sense. Health of my retrained pipeline looks good. Understand the automations. Let's now take a deeper look at one of the most critical pieces, our newly retrained model. Now, just like with my data quality pipeline and my model evaluation store, I'm able to create checks here. And in this case, I've crossed the necessary AUC threshold as kind of a baseline gate for that retrained model. But Dataiku has gone far beyond that if we actually dive into that newly retrained model. We have a number of automatically done diagnostics and guardrails for things like leakage and overfit, letting me know in this case that, hey, that train and test data set is in balance, just like we expected. I can also define my own custom business checks down here in assertion. So working with subject matter experts to basically understand if we haven't had any partial failures of the machine in the last couple of months, we really don't expect many of those machines to have failures. So automated guardrails, custom guardrails from the business, and then a ton of automatically built-in explainability and performance options for me to dig in and understand. For example, this dynamic what if to help validate the model. If I even want to do a model comparison of this newly retrained model to the one that was out in production, I can easily take a look at that as well across a number of performance metrics. All right, everything is looking good so far. Now, as you're looking through this, as you're seeing what I'm doing, it is important to note that Dataiku saved model objects, these green diamonds, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, really do act as the center of the MLOps process. Right? They unlock one-click batch scoring, one-click API creation, one-click creation of that standardized model evaluation store we saw that collects all of those metrics and helps kick off our alerts. Really, the goal here is that it helps with achieving replication at scale. But fortunately, because this is so important, Dataiku's ops loop is extremely open and customizable. So for example, for rapid time to value, my team can use Dataiku's built-in AutoML to create those saved model objects across a number of templates. Or with MLflow, my team can code up their own custom Python models backed by full experiment tracking. But here's where things get extra interesting, which is I know that my organization has builders in other applications. And we can now actually pull those into Dataiku for operationalization and governance. This includes importing models from, let's say, a Databricks MLflow registry, or even surfacing up external endpoints running in AWS, Azure, GCP as well. When you pull those in, you get all of the same built-in visuals, you get the same easy scoring, and you get that same standardized evaluation. Really just giving me huge confidence that I can apply these standardized Dataiku XOps techniques at scale, regardless of where and how the models are built. All right. So overall, I'm feeling pretty confident that my newly retrained model and its data pipeline are validated and ready to redeploy into production. But as Francois was talking about, in today's world, data and traditional models aren't always the end of the story. So before we head into production, I'd like to spend a little time talking about how seamlessly GenAI has been worked into this process in a safe, controlled way, backed by Dataiku's LLM mesh. So what we're doing here in this project is we're using generative AI downstream of our predictive maintenance predictions to automatically generate safety and emails to safety engineers to help them understand why a machine failure is predicted to be coming and what actions they should take. And in this case, this is very easily built on top of our own internal documents related to best practices for how to maintain and take care of these machines. And what I want to focus on is that whether you're using code or our pre-built recipes, whether you're using hosted GenAI service providers or self-hosted open source models, the LLM mesh makes sure that you can use the power of GenAI safely with all the controls you need. So let's take a look at where that email text is being generated. We can actually see our prompt here and see how it's dynamically taking in data from those predictions to help generate that safety email. Now, where this all starts from is LLM connections in our mesh. The fact that based on what I'm permissioned to see, I can have models from Azure, Vertex, OpenAI, open source, whatever I've been granted permission to use as part of my organization. And these connections are so powerful because they're ready to use in this prompt recipe, for example, but they're also ready and seamlessly able to be used within other front ends like Dataiku Answers, our ready to go no-code chatbot, still built on that same knowledge bank of internal documents. The other thing to note is that whenever I leverage these connections, content filter policies on toxicity and PII are set and forced and permissioned at any time. So really me and my team as the builders, we don't have to worry about those best practices. Now, to get more into the LLM ops side of the house, what I love so much about Dataiku is that that same framework that we just highlighted for data ops and ML ops to set up those thresholds and alerts and calculations are present for LLM ops with our LLM evaluation store. Now, what this does is it lets us leverage an LLM as a judge to produce quantitative metrics. But of course, you can also add your own to adapt to your specific LLM use case. Once you have that eval store with these metrics being collected, you can build metrics, automations, and alerts just like you could in data quality checks and that ML evaluation store. But when it comes to GenAI, of course, these quantitative evaluations aren't the end-all be-all. The LLM eval store, if we dive into a particular run, also gives us human-in-the-loop method for examining prompts and their responses. So at the top, seeing my different predictions and the features that went into them. And at the bottom, zeroing in on the prompt, the context, and the LLM response, that email that was sent, allowing me to quickly and easily run through different options and verify what's being sent by the LLM in combination with those quantitative metrics. Really, the key here is that all the same benefits around seamless operationalization and replicating at scale apply directly to generative AI. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at deployment of that new API service from that traditional ML predictive maintenance model. So after passing those data quality and model quality checks on that newly retrained model, our API bundle has been pushed into what Francois was talking about, our Dataiku deployer. That deployer really acting as that central location to manage deployment of batch processes and API endpoints. So maybe with a little more of my machine learning engineer hat on now, I'm ready to pick up what my colleagues have validated and move it into production. And with Dataiku, that means that I can deploy a model wherever makes the most sense for my use case across not just Dataiku, but across things like Google, Snowflake, Azure ML, and SageMaker. So let's go ahead and deploy. So what you'll notice here is I'm actually getting a governance halt. And this is really important to bring up because ops is multifaceted, like Francois was saying, and it isn't just about technical checks. It's also about multi-layer governance and involving other stakeholders in the process. So maybe acting as more of a business stakeholder or governance lead who needs to have overall visibility into AI projects and models across the organization, I'll hop into Dataiku Govern. Now, Dataiku Govern is going to show me all my projects across the different stages of their lifecycle. Here's our current predictive maintenance project. I can also take a different view to see things like risk value ratings and understand that my predictive maintenance project has been auto-tagged as leveraging external LLMs and what it's using. If I head into the project itself, sort of its governance twin, I can see things like what business initiative it's rolling up to, what stage it's at, automated documentation, and of course, the related models. So let's take a look at this model, and I'm able to understand that it's currently in the review stage. Because this is a critical use case, the API and the project itself won't be allowed to move into production infrastructure until the sign-off from all parties is received. You can see here we can do things like request feedback, request final approval, and give that final review. Now, this review is so interesting because it's tied back to where we just came from. It's tied back to our deployer, where if now I try to deploy in a production, you'll see that I'm able to. I've passed that governance check and some deployment hooks, make sure that I'm publishing at the correct time. So again, Dataiku acting as this seamless orchestrator tied into your governance practices. And this, where I want to go now is that this sort of easy and partially automated deployment is great, but the more I scale, the more I need to stay on top of all of my models and AI processes, even if they're not deployed within Dataiku. Now, fortunately, Dataiku gives me that single pane of glass experience in one of the new pieces of our platform, Unified Monitoring. I can see all of my batch processes and my API endpoints across Dataiku and my different providers. This keeps everything standardized, cuts down on frictions, reduces risk. If I head in and find my particular API endpoint, I can actually see availability metrics, but also detailed metrics on things like model status, those saved model objects, those model evaluation stores, understanding how those checks and thresholds I put interact in one place. And once I find something of interest, I'm just a few clicks away from linking directly back to the Dataiku project itself to dive in and validate. Really just perfectly complementing the alerts I started with today. So with my new model deployed, we can verify we successfully fixed our performance issues. Our data drift and prediction drift are back below the thresholds. We back this up all with rapid automatic actions, guardrails, and sign-offs for this critical use case. All right, Dataiku's got me covered for operationalization, all in an open loop that can import and deploy models from wherever it makes sense for my organization. All right, well, Francois, I hope that has shown a little bit of the day in life and how you can connect all these dots back together. I'll hand it back to you. Tell us a little bit about what's coming.
Definitely, thank you, Chris. So yes, indeed, I think it was important for us to show and not just tell, because I think it's important to see you show some of those critical features, deployment, and model evaluation stored, unified monitoring, and see how LLM actually could be used quite easily in the end. I mean, there are challenges. There will always be challenging by using LLM, but they fit in. Again, can't speak. To close this session, I'm going to take a quick look ahead and try to talk about. So again, the main slide is not going to be about future ideas of improvement. It's really stuff that we are working on, so that you should expect coming in next quarters. We are basically two important initiatives that we want to relate to the ops topic. So the first one, hardening, it's the fact that today, even though you have those gates, you have a lot of things about how you evaluate models, how you can, add documentations and sign off. They are really focused on the model, and the testing, like in very classical sense of the term, testing my project, is actually really an ad hoc process. So we are working on two things. The first one is to define what we call readiness checks. Is the idea that in your organization, you can define what is a production grade project, what are the criteria. You can really do that. And those are going to be first automatic check when you actually want to move a project to production. But that's not enough. What we want to do is bring those checks up to the designer, because the sooner you know what is a production grade project, the easier it is to actually create a production grade project. You don't want to have to redesign your project on the last minute because you realize that you forget something about the rules on the engines or on the type of recipes that you can use and stuff like that. So the readiness checks is about that, really having these notions of building a production grade project from the start and propagating those best practices across the organization. The second one is really focused on testing a project, not that much of a model, because as I said, there are a lot of things to actually test a model, but more about the Python code you are using, the pipelines, the endpoints, the web apps, and you do that in the logic of saying, I have my project in design, I deploy it on QA, I run a full batch of checks and tests on this QA, and importantly, this is done automatically, and this generates reports that can then be used for deployment, that can be then pushed to govern part of your sign-off. I'm not going to sign off if I don't have a QA report. That's standard stuff. That's stuff we want to incorporate into our project and make stuff that are day-to-day usage for companies that requires it. Second point is LLM ops, putting LLM at work. We mentioned a lot of things. Chris showed how things are already there, but we still have work to do, of course. I mean, everyone has work to do on these topics today. So we're still working on improving that, improving the LLM connections, and especially the guardrails and the auditing. So proactive cost control, that's an important topic. LLM can really have a high cost. So providing preemptive cost control and not just usage reporting is important. We are making the deployer more aware of LLM and generative AI, so they are easier to deploy with their specificities, as I mentioned. There are specificities into what is an LLM, and the application can build with them. We are, and Chris showed that very briefly, which is a brand new feature, how you evaluate out of the box your GenAI application, building those LLM as a judge metrics, the faithfulness, and all answer relevancies and stuff like that, be it in a RAG context or a standard LLM prompting, and the monitoring around that. So again, building that out of the box, making it expandable, and always keep in mind those things that I mentioned at the beginning. Multi-personas, you don't need to have high coding skill to use LLM or to do testing. Multi-platform, meaning it needs to work on everything that IQ supports, whatever the data sources or the systems running on. And this multi-axis, meaning that LLM is a new aspect of things we need to answer. And hardening and testing is not just about model, it's about much more than model. So those are two things we are working on right now. Should be out, new features, maybe even as we speak or in the coming quarters. And the last slide is going to be about getting one step back. The way we think that things are going to move, and maybe we want them to move in the coming maybe more a year or 2 years in front. You heard me and Chris talked a lot about not just machine learning. It's an important thing. We talked a lot about data. We talked about LLM. And what we see today in most corporations is still remain disjointed operations, maybe even done by different teams, like machine learning, data, LLM. So, and one of the great effort we have done this year in Dataiku and that we're going to keep doing is bringing all that together. We firmly believe that merging all those practices for machine learning, MLOps, data with DataOps, and LLM with LLMOps, and even FinOps into this XOps logic in a single place, that then is the one way you can actually safely deploy useful AI, because that's what we want in the end. So again, you heard me say that a lot about not just machine learning, but also data and LLM. You've seen it, and you're going to see more of that in the coming quarters. That's definitely something we want to push for. So that's it. Again, I hope that was an interesting session for you. Maybe it raised a lot of questions that we would be happy to hear, or if you can raise it to your Dataiku team, it will be a pleasure to discuss further this topic.